It was the evening of Sunday, January 21st, 2001. To be exact, around 6:20 to 6:40 p.m. I was on the way from Winn-Dixie, where I'm currently working, heading home. I was turning left at a yellow light, confidently thinking the truck 25 to 35 feet away was going to come to a stop. I was wrong. The truck hit the passenger side of my little 1989 Hunchback Hyundai, my very first car, at 45 to 50 miles per hour. Thank God no one was riding with me, or they wouldn't be here today. In some odd way, my vehicle managed to miss a pole that was clearly supposed to be struck with my car, by the angle the guy hit me at. I ended up on the other side of the pole in the other lane, as if I was heading back towards my job. As the vehicle got closer to impact, the more things began to become a dream to me. All I remember is the truck hitting my vehicle in slow motion. Time went on, not sure how much, but I was awoken by the touch of a presence upon my face, a woman. Being that she was on the passenger side, which was struck by my truck, looking into the vehicle, I knew that she didn't reach in and touch me, but it was like a spiritual connection. As I awoke with this touch, I looked to my right to see a lady with red hair. I can't remember her clothing, but I asked what happened and she said, "You've just been in an accident." I was still recovering and I responded by saying, "Oh, for real?" Kinda slow. She then said, "Yes, everything is okay. The ambulance is on the way." I said okay. I never noticed her leave the side of my car. It was like a minute or less after our conversation that the police and ambulance were pulling up. My car was totaled. The accident was so bad that it was already documented that there had been a fatality. Out of amazement, everyone sees a skinny 5'9", 16-year-old kid get out of the vehicle with few scratches and no injuries. Note that the person that hit me was a guy that attended my school. This is the part that gets me. You know how there was a witness that explained what happened and everything they saw? Well, there was only one witness, and it was a male. He claimed he saw everything, being that he was behind me. I told everyone about the lady with red hair, and they say there was only one witness to see the accident, which was that man. My mother says it was my guardian angel. If I would have died that day, I probably would be headed for hell. But thank you for God's grace. He saved me and gave me another chance. I'm 22 now. I've been becoming closer and closer to Him every day. Thank God that I'm here to tell my story. My story took place about 10 years ago in Tucson, Arizona. My grandson was only 5 months old at the time. He was very sick and was in the hospital with needles and tubes inserted into various parts of his little body. He had been vomiting for days on end, dehydrating. The cause was unknown, but he was getting worse. My daughter and her husband were glued to his bedside, but exhaustion was beginning to set in. That is when I decided to pray. I walked over to the crucifix that my great-grandmother had brought with her from Ireland and prayed. I asked God to please send Jordan an angel and to heal him. The next morning, I packed a few things to take with me to the hospital. It was a beautiful, sunny July day in 2001. I got to the hospital and sent my son and daughter-in-law home. The room was so dark and dismal. Even with the curtains open, it didn't seem to allow much light into the room. Suddenly, the door opened, and without anyone turning on the light switch, the room brightened. In walked a small framed woman, perhaps in her early 50s. What struck me first was how the room lit up. But then I noticed that she was dressed in clothes from the 1940s. She wore dark glasses, had dark hair swept up in a nice but conservative hairstyle. She had a black dress. She also carried the same type of old-fashioned pocketbook that my grandmother used to carry around. I said hello and asked her if she was the doctor. She didn't answer me, but walked right up to the baby, picked him up and cradled him in her arms. She smiled at him and then slowly placed him back in his bed. She then rubbed his head and rubbed his belly, and I just watched in silence. She turned to me, smiled, and said, "He'll be fine." She turned around and then walked out the front door. I immediately called up my daughter and asked if that was Jordan's doctor. My daughter said that Jordan had a male doctor, but she would call the nurse's desk. The nurse told her that no one went in or out of that room but me. The baby was released from the hospital the very next day. While I was going to college over the fall and winter of 1987 to 1988, I worked at a hair salon in Boulder, Colorado as a receptionist to earn extra money. The salon was located in an indoor mall, and since I was going to school, I would often work late afternoon until closing, which was 9 p.m. One night in January of '88, the weather had turned bad and we were getting a really severe snowstorm. All of the stylists had gone home and I was left to close up the shop. It was around 8:30 p.m. and I was just grabbing my coat to head out the door when an elderly gentleman came in. I was irritated because I wanted to get on the road, and I knew my normal 20-minute drive home was going to take much longer because of the storm. He greeted me, and before he could even ask, I brusquely told him that we were closed and there were no stylists available if he was looking to get a haircut. He seemed disappointed, and I immediately felt bad for how I spoke to him. He said he had just come in from outside and asked if he could sit for a moment and warm up. I said of course, although I noticed that he didn't seem to have a single speck of snow on him and his shoes were completely dry. I noticed he had a Walkman cassette player in his hands and asked him if he had just gotten it. He said he had received it as a gift, but didn't know how it worked, so I gave him a tutorial as we chatted. He told me his name was Michael, and he seemed truly amazed by modern technology, as if he had been living in a cave for the last 30 years. I was very fascinated and taken by him. About a half hour later, he stood up quickly and said he had to go. He said, "Thank you, Sandra, for your kindness. Have a safe trip home," and walked out the door. Now, I had not told this man my name and was not wearing a name tag. I went out of the door after him to ask him how he knew my name, and he had simply disappeared. Confused and feeling a little lightheaded, I walked out to my car to head home. As I was traveling down the highway, up ahead of me were all sorts of emergency vehicles. There had been a horrible accident involving multiple vehicles, and the next day I found out that there had been a couple of fatalities. If I had left the salon when I originally was heading out, I surely would have been in that accident. I truly believe that that elderly gentleman, Michael, was a guardian angel sent to protect me. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the United States, and this is where this event took place in February of 2007. The biggest club district in Indy is Broad Ripple, about 60 blocks north of downtown. Myself, my girlfriend, and a couple of friends were out bar hopping on a Friday night, just having a good time. I ran out of cash and had to run to the ATM at the bank down the block. There were plenty of ATMs around, but I was willing to walk a couple dozen yards to avoid the fees. I made it to the ATM and withdrew some cash, and this is when things got weird. I turned around and saw that across the street was a man leaning against the telephone pole on the corner. He was dressed well, in a black suit with an open collar maroon shirt. He was tall, maybe 6'4", and was white with short jet black hair. I couldn't be sure at the distance, but I firmly believed that his eyes were completely jet black. And I've read stories about black-eyed people, and I believe them now. The scariest part was that he was staring across this crowded intersection at me with this incredibly smug look on his face. Now, I was in the army and spent 16 months in Iraq. I'm only 5'7", but I'm solidly built and I can handle myself. I've been frightened before, but the only word for what this man inspired in me is abject terror. His appearance was absolutely impeccable, and he was just standing there like he knew something I didn't, and as if it were something I wasn't going to like. I didn't want to hang around any longer than I had to, so I took off at a quick pace back toward the club where my friends were. After several yards, I allowed myself a glance backward and saw that he was following me across the street. I reminded myself that nothing could happen with people all around, but I didn't really believe it. I reached the club, but there was a line in front of the bouncer who was checking IDs. I stood there shaking with fear as I saw the man pause on the other side of the street, look both ways, then calmly begin crossing towards me. Every move he made was precise and deliberate. I knew that when he got to me, something horrible was going to happen, and it was only with great effort that I managed to maintain my composure. Just then, another man walked up to me from the other direction. He was in his late 20s or early 30s, several years older than me, wearing jeans, sneakers, a baseball cap, and a hooded sweatshirt from a local university. He touched me on the shoulder and I immediately felt calmer. Then he said, "Don't worry, you're all right. We have everything under control." I glanced back at the man in the suit, and he had paused in the middle of the street. It's amazing that he wasn't run over. The sweatshirt man turned away from me to face the man in the suit. It was clear to me that this was a showdown. After a moment, the man in the suit sneered at us in frustration, it seemed, then turned around and walked away. The sweatshirt man turned back to me with a reassuring smile, patted my shoulder, and walked on. I wished now that I had followed him and asked some questions, but the bouncer beckoned me inside, and I really wanted to get back to my friends. When I found them in the club, my girlfriend immediately knew something was wrong, but before she could say anything, another friend, Scott, said, "Did your friend find you?" I replied, "Who?" Scott exclaimed that they had run into a guy who was asking about me. Then he had said we had gone to school together and that he really needed to find me. When I pressed for details, they described the sweatshirt man. I don't know who either man was, but I truly believe that I was targeted by something evil and that my guardian angel, or something, protected me.